let me do an announcement about next week. So, Leadership Board did meet last on Tuesday, and we decided to couple our experience next Sunday instead of keeping folks here from 9:45 to 1 and have that span, or for those of you in 8:30 service, 8:30 to 1. So we decided that we're going to have our quarterly meeting of the Leadership Board at 9:30. So we're going to get started at 9:30. We'll come in here. I'll be done in there by 9:20. Hold me to it, 8:30 folks. 9:20, roll in here. Claudia and I will get started with that, and then we're going to have an experience on where Central United Methodist Church goes from here. And I'll engage us in what's called a World Cafe, where we'll share at tables. I see that we have folks in Sunday school classes and services here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a big old mix around next week. So we'd love to have that so we can share life together. Okay, so 9:30 next week, and then we'll go from there. All right, this has been great. I really appreciate your patience with me and your continued grace with me in all of this. I don't know, this is a little outside my norm to do something like this in my first year of ministry somewhere. So to get to know you in this way, and I hope to get to know me, has been an important asset for us to move forward. Today we're talking about experience. Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience in the Wesleyan tradition. Our experience oftentimes is our starting point. Why do I say that? Our experience is our starting point because oftentimes we are not reading the Bible with our family of origin, but we've inherited the conditioning of our family of origin, the condition of our society, and the ways that we live. We know and recognize from infancy what attachment means from child to parent, and that attachment shapes our understanding of God. So in so many ways, and I think those who are moderate to progressive-leaning theologians understand this starting point instead of Scripture. Scripture is a little more to unpack. You've got to understand violence, you've got to understand war, you've got to understand a variety of things, what a king is. These images of God being in some faraway place, or God walking with you in a valley. I don't know about you all, but I was totally freaked out about Noah and the ark living in El Paso, Texas as a 6-year-old. Wait, what? How much water? Wait, for how long? 40 days and nights? Oh my gosh, we haven't had 40 days and nights of rain for the last 10 years. I mean, I can't imagine it. Okay, so our experience changes things because we're not really able to open up Scripture and see it just sort of drop in our heads. So our experience is important. I was also asked a few of you have asked, why do you go back to Dallas? Or why are you going to Birmingham? Or what do you do in Chicago? Or what you do, what are you doing all over the country? And so I have a secular PhD in family science. Some of you all may know that. And I'm asked to go all over the country to help churches, nonprofits, and other organizations to create and curate a healthy staff or a healthy organization. We look at finances, we look at the past history of the church or nonprofit organization, and I do these kinds of presentations all the time. So I'm blending a little bit of my personal experience and a little bit of family systems knowledge and organizational behavior knowledge, and hopefully we'll see where we end up today. You don't have a handout today because this is my experience. Okay. All right. So, and there's pictures of my grandmother, and I'll gladly give you pictures of my grandmother. Okay. So, let's go to the next slide. Father Richard Rohr talks about this in his book, Everything Belongs. He talks about the new physics. The new physics tells us that matter is merely a manifestation of spirit, but spirit, consciousness, relationship itself is the real thing. We used to think that all energy was in the particles of the atom. Now it seems that energy is in fact in the space between the particles. Okay? So the space between the particles. We used to focus on this atom interacts with this atom, isn't that interesting? Now, over the last 25 years, this idea of matter, of gray matter, of what's going on in space, how do these atoms communicate with one another, how don't they communicate with one another, that it's more interesting to try to figure out what the particles are doing in between them, how they are in conversation, what's happening as they relate to one another. In family systems thinking, this is exactly what it's like. It's one thing to go to Ancestry.com and know a bunch of people's birth dates and pictures and death dates and all of that kind of thing, but it's a whole nother thing to know what in their context made them who they were, how they interacted with their parents, how they interacted at work, at play, at school, with their family of choice, etc. Then all of a sudden you're talking about relationships. And when you talk about relationships, everything is different. There is not one relationship that is similar to another. Just because I say I grew up in El Paso doesn't mean there are five other people in here that say, oh, I grew up in El Paso too. I know exactly what he went through. No, you don't. Or let's lean into how we understand our context in the United States. Our context in the United States is, as predominantly white folks in this room, we have inherited generational wealth, whereas persons of color have not necessarily inherited generations of wealth. There's something going on around these contexts and in these lived experiences that help us and them relate to generational wealth, generational poverty. It's non-judgmentally, it's just what is happening in our world. We're of different contexts. So our job, I believe, as faithful disciples of Christ, next slide, Max, is to enter into the universe, this expanding universe of understanding. What is actually going on in between the particles? I want to know what's going on in your life. It's one thing to recognize you from the directory in 2004, right? I have that as my study sheet in the office every day. Wait, who just called Michelle? Let me look them up. Oh, okay, I need it. I need to bone up, right? So, nope, they're not here. Okay, so let's imagine them. You know, so I want to get to know you. I want to get to know you. Yes, it's one thing to have a picture, a 2D picture, but it's a whole nother thing to have an experience. It's a whole nother thing to really get into relationship, to really have this enriching time where we see how this community is really resourced in human social capital. I don't know about you, I'm excited to come to Central United Methodist Church on Sunday. I'm excited because I get to soak up all of this lived experience just as you are, and I get to start my week with this. Here we go, walk into this week. I just had this amazing experience with all of these folks. I love it. Next slide, Max. So how do we come to understand that we've got to change our minds potentially in how we approach another. Because we've all been trained, thank you history professors everywhere. Any history professors in here? No, history majors. Any history majors? We've got a couple of history majors. Okay. So my history majors will know it takes a long time to change someone's mind. Okay? So this next slide is a funny one. I love it. So here are the models of American Gothic standing in front of American Gothic 30 years later. So this is Graham Wood painted. This isn't Graham Wood. Graham Wood painted American Gothic. His sister Nan is the one on the left. And their family dentist named Bruce McCreary is standing to the right. Okay, so just look at their faces. Has anything changed? I love that. What a great picture. What a great picture. It must have been somebody that just had a sly personality, right, to put that. It's hard to change people's minds. Next slide, Max. This is a little, gosh, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. This is a little small to see. This is from Time Magazine puts every 10 years, puts a graph up to see how long it takes for an issue to become, for our mind to change in the United States around an issue. So, for example, you've got interracial marriage. It's the green line from 1787 to 1967, Loving v. Virginia, right? Took a long time. Prohibition, it's the orange line that starts at about 1840-ish, and people start changing their mind, and finally the 18th Amendment comes around in 1920. Then you've got same-sex marriage on the far right here. On the far right, the Oberfell and Hodges case in 2015, same-sex marriage. See, they haven't updated for 2020. Roe v. Wade in 1973. I wonder what the graph looks like with all of that that's going on right now. But it takes a long time to change our minds. So when I started to track this in thinking about as a leader of an organization and not wanting to really shift a whole lot quickly, what do I have to do as a leader? And you all have been here in a variety of ways. Think about raising your kids. You're not going to give an infant solid food immediately. Eat the Big Mac. We know we're transitioning you from the bottle, but it's time for a Big Mac. No, we're going to do developmentally appropriate things. We're going to blend the Big Mac and make it into pudding. Oh, no, I don't think that sounds gross. We'll edit that part out. That was really. I'm glad we're not eating here. That's really gross. But you start with some pudding and then you introduce solids, Cheerios, Goldfish, the gateway foods to my favorite popcorn. Like, I could eat popcorn like it's going out of style. I don't know. I think I'm just going to grow kernels. That's how it is. So it takes a long time. And how do you move a people? Okay, I'm going to introduce this idea. I'm going to introduce this idea in 2023, and maybe by 2026, we can see it come to fruition. Or, here's an opportunity. I wonder if I can get enough people around the table thinking about it so we can move a little faster. What is it that Stephen Covey said? Stephen Covey says that we can only move at the speed of trust. We can only move at the speed of trust. If that's the case, then I've got to engage more closely with the organization and individuals of the organization to build our relationship on trust. Not just that I know you, but that we're trusting one another in this. So I got to thinking about what it takes for change. Next slide, Max. So think about this as, this is my best computer drawing of an iceberg. You're welcome. That's about it. It's just like that. Just like that. You've seen them just like that. Okay, so think about this iceberg. So the tip of the iceberg are trends and events. Underneath the water are systems and system structures, and deep under that are mental models, okay? So I announced at the beginning of May that we were going to do this kind of thing, BUMC series in here, and this is an event. It's part of a trend that has happened in this church because we have Sunday school classes. So we already had an hour set aside for this kind of thing, and so we're just living into events and trends. So I'm not changing any minds. There's nothing really going on here. I'm just shifting a venue for a few weeks, and then maybe we go back to our spaces and places, or maybe there's something else that emerges with smaller groups. I have no idea. It's summer. We can have a little fun. Underneath the waterline, there are systems and structures. We believe as a people that education is necessary and important. And so we've created a system and structure called Sunday School. And Sunday School has started from the very beginning of Methodism. It was a set-aside hour to teach children reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's. I don't know anymore. Okay? Well, underneath that are the mental models. Why would we think it's important to educate children? So they can read, so they can engage in the world, so they can create their own worldview, right? This is the mental model. So all we're doing, friends, here at this event this morning is living into the mental model that we believe education is vitally important so we can read the world for ourselves. Right? That's all. This is it. This is it. Let's get serious for just a second. Something that I've tried to wrap my head around. I really, truly believe over the last about 20 years, I've been greatly affected in my own call to ministry in racial justice work. How I can live as a cisgender white male and be in spaces and places to hear lament and pain and allow that trust in communities of color to build so that we can build and start breaking cycles of oppression and marginalization. This is really what I feel compelled to do. Every day, I'm always seeking out those conditions that I've been given in my lizard brain, my own mental models, right? My implicit biases. So let's take an Andy serious conversation. So I'm driving in Dallas, going to a meeting across town. This happened last October. I'm working for an organization that's doing racial justice work in South Dallas, a predominantly black part of Dallas, South Dallas Fair Park, and I'm driving from my neighborhood, which is predominantly white and Hispanic in North Dallas. So I get behind the wheel, I pull up probably a mile from my house, and there's a black man that walks across the street on the crosswalk and my car. And I consciously felt my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. So here I am thinking, I've done all this work internally. I've done all this work in community. I get paid to connect with mostly black folks, and still my hands are gripping the wheel tighter. Bezel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps Score, right? So what is my body telling me? My body is telling me that there's something implicit in my lizard brain about how I view a person of color. It was the first time, October 2023, friends, the first time that I recognized what was going on in my body. It was a beautiful, mindful moment to then say, I do not have to choose this. Move from my lizard brain to my mammalian brain, utilize my prefrontal cortex to say, I am not choosing that conditioning. Now, that doesn't free me forever. I still have those implicit biases. What's going on? When you think about Andy's mental models, what happened in that experience? An event and trend. So there I am driving from my house in North Dallas that is predominantly white neighborhood. The trend is I have followed where the white folks are because there are systems and structures in place, deed restrictions, HOAs. If you're interested in this kind of reading, which is not really uplifting, friends, but there's a lot of it out there. If you want, one book. I can't help myself. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. She has a whole chapter on housing. Systems and structures in place that create those trends, that have this event, and so the mental model is justified. My mental model is justified that a black man is dangerous, that a black man is the other, that a black man in front of my car is going to hurt me or is different enough, etc. That's what's going on in my mental model. This is also, if we expand it societally. If we expand this societally, we understand events, trends, systems, and structures, and mental models. What was happening? What was happening when we all watched George Floyd's murder on TV? 9 cell phone cameras recorded that. Not one. It wasn't television. It wasn't a television camera. It was 9 cell phone cameras. It was an event that was part of a trend, it was part of a system and structure that ultimately was part of a mental model. These kinds of things are affecting us, and when the United Methodist Church says our role is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So what does that mean? The transformation of the world is really about mental models, how we transform our mental models. Okay, Max, let's go to the next slide because I want to talk about my grandmother. All right. So part of the conditioning that I have is that my father was killed in a car accident in 1979. We moved to El Paso. We were living in Houston, moved to El Paso. We lived 2 blocks away from my grandparents. This is my grandmother, Shirley. My grandfather's name is Lloyd. You're not going to hear any Lloyd stories until next year. I keep all the Lloyd stories for year 2 because Shirley was way more out there. I'm more like Lloyd. So this is my grandmother. She had a beehive hairdo. Jet black dyed, awesome. She was amazing. This is her first Avon, I call it her glamour shot. But she had this beehive hairdo. So I'll tell another story about my grandmother. So I was at First United Methodist Church of Denton. Alex had just been born, the first great-grandchild. So I'm the first grandchild for my grandmother. First great-grandchild is born. So my grandmother is over the moon. She says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy a beautiful dress, and I'm going to get a brand new hat, and I'm going to participate in Alex's baptism. I said, oh, no, Ma, you're not a member at First United Methodist Church of Denton. You're going to stand there poised and pretty. You're not going to say anything. You're not going to do anything. I know you. I know you. So here is the next slide, Max. Here's what my grandmother decides to wear to Alex's. Now, the next one is good because you really do get to see her sass. Oh, yes, look at that. Oh, yes. She gives like the Greek Orthodox blessing too, so she's kind of like an icon. She's an icon, a Christian icon with her halo. Anyway, it is this massive blue feathered hat. This is her blue power suit, she called it. I'm like, Ma, you can't do this. So, she said, I was preaching that Sunday. So it was summer. I was preaching that Sunday, and my grandmother said, I'm going to read scripture for you. I want to lead in prayers. I'm like, fine, we'll do it at the first service. I'm 20 whatever years old. What do I know? And it's my grandmother. What harm could possibly be done? So, of course, she's giving everybody, she works the whole room. Like, it's First United Methodist Church of Denton, the 3,500 member church. It's the 8 o'clock service. It's in the sanctuary, works the whole room. People are just barely out of bed, just had a cup of coffee. And my grandmother's like, hey, how are you? Like, no, we're not selling anything, Ma. This is not a sales pitch, Ma. So I preach and everything, and during the baptism, my grandmother, will you stand with me, George? So I'm my grandmother, and George is me, and we're Megan and Alex. Yeah. So slowly my grandmother goes like this during the baptism. So she can be right in front. And so I'm not even seeing, Alex isn't even being baptized. Isn't that great? Anyway, awesome. She knew me, she got me. It was so much fun. My grandparents' house, I didn't realize it until later on. Thank you very much. I didn't realize it later on in life just how much of a refuge my grandparents' house was. It was a really, really wonderful place to be. So my grandmother died May of 2016. I came to El Paso, and I sat at my grandmother's bedside. We read Psalms, we sang together, and then about 3 days before her death, she didn't wake up again. She wouldn't take food, etc. So I kept singing and praying Psalms, and I was with her all day long. It was really a beautiful, beautiful moment. Several moments to be with her and see her friends. And so I leave El Paso I was going to, really uplifting, I went to General Conference 2016 2 weeks later. It was terrible. Anyway, so let's go to the next slide. There's, that's Alex and my grandmother. My brother and I couldn't find the picture of this actual picture, but my grandfather made it into a mug. So my brother sent me the mug shot. Oh, my brother. One of these days you'll meet Trent. But there's Alex and then my grandmother with that. And of course, she didn't let him out of her sight, obviously. So I go back to El Paso to see this rock wall in El Paso. There's a church behind it. Someone had knocked down the rock wall, either backed into it. And I had a rental car. And I sat in the rental car. And I, for some reason, this was 4 or 5 months later, to go check on my grandmother's house, put it up for sale, clean the last part of it. I sat in the rental car and I wept. Like, could not move the car. I was so, and it was a rock wall. A rock wall. That's when I realized that someone had broken down my refuge. Someone had backed into that, and my heart burst open, and I could not imagine my refuge to be must. Couldn't start the car, I called Megan, I said, there's something wrong with me. There's wetness coming from my eyes. I don't know what's going on. Well, you've been carrying all this stress for the last 4 or 5 months. So the next slide, Max. I spent the next week calling everybody in El Paso to rebuild that wall. My parents said, it's time to sell the house. You go to El Paso frequently. I was the chair of the Lydia Patterson board for 6 years. You go check on it, so on and so forth. And so we sold the house. But this was my rebuilding. My blessing for my grandmother. Now it's somebody else's refuge. I had my moment. I understood what that place means. I'm shifting from that place that's in El Paso on the corner of Catalpa and Hawkins. And I'm placing that in my heart, knowing that my grandmother, as wild and woolly and crazy and uncontrollable as she was, is now deep, deep within. And I'll never let her go. Changing my mind. Changing our minds about how we focus ourselves, our experience of living life together. The event, trend, system, and structure that my grandmother, my grandparents helped and my mom helped instill with me, from their mental models, they were able to build on that. When the rock wall was torn down and built back up, that's when I knew that I needed to step out in faith. Now, boy, I was 30, how old was I? No, I was 41 when my grandmother died. Wow. It took me that long to realize that I needed to be who I needed to be. Okay, so now I am able to take on new experiences, giving me new ways of seeing the world, new ways of shaping. It's no longer, it's a mental model I inherited, but a mental model that potentially I can grow into and out of. I can choose what I want. I don't have to choose my grandmother's upbringing in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in a segregated Baltimore, Maryland. I don't have to choose what I've inherited. I can actually say, no, I'm letting my hands off the steering wheel and saying, I'm not choosing to go that direction. That's not who I am. Rebuilding that wall certainly was in honor of my grandmother, but mostly for me. I needed to see that wall back. Okay, next slide, Max. Okay. Oh, man. All right. So let's get into what I've been doing this last year is working with churches on their own understanding of the mental models of their church, their inherited church. And I found a wonderful book called Appreciative Inquiry. Once again, terrible title. Wonderful book. Better than last week's book, Deepening Your Effectiveness. Oh boy, all right, okay. So Appreciative Inquiry. It's taking memories, hopes, and conversations to a new level with your church. So let's go to the next slide, Max. And what the authors here say is that it's Mark Bronson. What the authors here say is that there are three parts and pieces that shape our religious life in the church: spiritual formation, congregational formation, and missional formation. Spiritual formation is paying attention to God. Missional formation is paying attention to our neighbors. And congregational formation is paying attention to each other. And each of these have to be in balance. Have to be in balance. So when we pay attention to God, we pray, we attend worship services, we have small groups, we hold each other accountable, etc. in our spiritual practices. We understand that our prayers, presence, gift, service, and witness makes an impact. Out of God's generosity, we're giving back. When we pay attention to each other in our congregational formation, what we're doing is we're actually gathering in smaller groups and saying, how is it with your soul? What are we doing here as an experience? Does our worship life, is it not just rote, or is it inspiring? Does it help us to interact more faithfully with the Holy Spirit? And our missional formation is when we begin to see how we interact with others around us, paying attention to our neighbors. Our leadership board is looking at a 1-mile radius around the church. Who are our neighbors? What does that look like? How do we engage? What are the needs of our neighborhood? What are the needs of the people around us? Well, you don't have to go very far to find that there are 30,000 students right across the street, and 2,800 or 2,900 employees at that big university over there. I don't know about you, but that's a mission field, friends. That's really exciting to think about. Well, what are the needs? What are the needs of our neighbors? How do we better connect with them, etc.? We also have new neighborhood friends living in and through right around us, right here. So how are we engaging in this? Appreciative Inquiry says, how are we as a congregation at the event level, trend level, system and structure level, and the mental model level, how are we shaping our life around God, shaping our life with one another, and shaping our collective life, being mindful of our neighbors? Next slide, Max. So the assumptions of Appreciative Inquiry are these. The first is, what we focus on becomes our reality. Okay, let me pull the rug out just really quickly, because this is a rough one for a lot of churches out there. This is not a Central United Methodist Church only issue. What we focus on becomes our reality. Two things in churches that are happening right now: decline in attendance, decline in funding. If your local congregation is so focused on decline in attendance and decline in funding, that is the only thing you're going to see. That's the only thing you're going to see. So I'll be very frank with you. I've done some really, really phenomenal memorial services for amazing people here. This congregation is richly blessed. And I just bask in it, knowing their families, knowing their friends, seeing you all show up, having that interaction with you. So oftentimes when I'm eating the snacks in the hallway, drinking my coffee with everybody else during the reception, oh, Andy, I'm so sorry that you weren't here when this church was bigger. Oh, Andy, we used to have a lot of staff and a lot of money, but you're here now. I'm like, we just walked out of this amazing memorial service talking about this person who affected so many lives, and you come to me dour about how bad things are? Are you kidding? We just talked about resurrection, and you're back in the tomb. So what's going on here? If we're constantly focusing on that, then, oh, Andy, I'm sorry, summer's hard, people travel. I don't care. Where two or more are gathered, that's where the Spirit is. That's all it is. We're going to do amazing things if it's just two or more of us. So let's take that outside the walls. Oh, I wouldn't want you to come to my church. It used to be bigger. Yeah, that's real encouraging. How about I've met some of the friendships that I have for life at this church. That I've seen engineers give some of the best sermons ever. I've seen young people rise to occasions that I couldn't even imagine a young person rise to. Like friends, that's us. What if we focused on that? We just had 8:30 service, folks. I don't know if you saw the couple that I was talking to. They said, Dr. Stoker, we've watched your videos, your worship videos online, and we thought we'd come to church today. And so we're doing this church, and then there's another church across town that we're going to at 10:55. I said, great. I said, so how'd you find us? And they said they Googled church near the university, good music. Okay, right? So, yeah, get out of here, choir. Yeah, keep up the good work and go get to... Well, that was awkward. What? That's awesome. Oh, speaking of, bye, y'all. Oh, my gosh, it's so funny. Okay. Oh, my gosh. I'm kind of glad Megan Stoker lives in Dallas. She would give me grief all week for that moment right there. Okay, so if we focus on that, if those are the two things, close to the university and good music, that's how they found us. Okay, how many of you all would start with close to the university and good music? That's just the building block. Yeah, isn't it great? And not only are we close to the university, we have good music, but there are amazing people here from a diversity of backgrounds that want to know more about Jesus. What's your background? How'd you get here? Why United Methodism? Now all of a sudden they're here. Now we're in a posture of, you are about to be treated to something amazing because I'm going to give you what I've found here. Give you back. Language and questions change reality. Language and questions change reality. The way we speak to one another, how we approach guests, how we approach longtime friends in the church, changes things. By my always feeling like I've got to shift the conversation to, do you see the assets amid the deficits you just shared with me? I feel like I'm always having to shift that. Yeah, we're in a season of transition. Yes, I'm not just reframing the issue. We're in a season of transition, and we have something amazing to offer anyone who walks in these doors. And what we have to offer is ourselves. Questions. Questions change reality. Well, what do you think is going on? That there's a decline in attendance and a decline in funding. Well, we're all retirees. No, you're not. I know a lot of people who are working. Well, it's us, we don't drive anymore. No, I know a lot of people that drive and get rides. No, that's not it. Think about what's going on in the context, our cultural context. More people are giving money to nonprofits than they are churches. Think about what's going on with, we're getting to be a more religiously diverse society. Think about how many sermons, services you can watch on the YouTube. You can get church any old time. Just dial it up. So yeah, things are shifting. What got us here isn't going to take us there. So giving God thanks for what got us here, and then asking God for courage to take us there. That's what's needed. Organizations are heliotropic. What that means, like a sunflower, they're tracking warmth and they're tracking brightness. Organizations that become heliotropic to the negative is a really, really challenging situation. If we constantly talk about how we're missing out or missing the point or what's going on at that big non-denominational church, why don't you wear skinny jeans and affliction t-shirt, Andy? More people would come. Would they? I don't think so. Yeah, I'd lose the congregation. Right. What happened? Well, he was wearing skinny jeans and affliction t-shirt. And that guy's all torso. He still shops in the Husky section at Sears. That's our guy. No one, just me? Okay. There was a Husky section for you. Okay, thank you, Jim. We'll talk. I'll hug you later. But Mom, I want Levi's. Nope, Huskies. Okay, heliotropic. So what if this organization, Central United Methodist Church, it was our experience to say, we believe in a God of love. It's in our mission statement that we are offering the unconditional love of Jesus. To be a presence in the city of Albuquerque, to offer the unconditional love of Jesus. What if that was how we were going to give warmth and sunlight to the world? That's how God is going to shape what we're up to. I love that. Instead of this idea that we have to just look in one direction to see deficit or decline, then the warmth is about resentment or anger or fear or shame or guilt. An organization can be heliotropic to that too, sadly. Families become heliotropic to that kind of stuff. People should have confidence in the journey to the future when they carry forward parts of the past. Those facets should be what's best about the past that we carry into the future. What got us here isn't going to take us there. Last couple slides, Max. I know you need to go. Thank you. Okay, and then I think I'll do this in 3 minutes. Do you all remember the 2010 Copiapo mining accident in Chile? It was called, there's a great book on it called Los 33. 33 miners are trapped in a 120-year-old copper mine in Chile. And they're all rescued. They're all rescued with minimal injuries. So Time, Newsweek, a variety of Magazines followed this every day. You could see it online. It was when Time and Newsweek were shifting from paper to online, and you could get updates on Los 33 every day. I got fascinated by this. I don't know, I was finishing up in the conference office. I oversaw clergy and volunteer sexual misconduct cases in our conference for 3 years in the North Texas Conference. And I would always ask the question, how do we build a culture where this doesn't happen? How do we increase accountability? How do we increase communication, et cetera? So I was fascinated by how this happened. Minimal injuries and all 33 are rescued. What traits of the culture were taking place? Next slide, Max. Oh, with some pictures. So here we have the final night in October of 2010. Final night, you have family and friends. Next slide, Max. Looking, here's the chute with the Chilean flag on it where they were bringing up I don't know if y'all remember seeing this. It was really cool. The videos are online as well. The president of Chile is hugging a gentleman in a tan shirt on our right-hand side of the chute. And the next slide, Max, there he is. There's the president on the right hugging, and then the last slide of these pictures, there's the final miner that comes in, and he rejoices that he's freed from the mine, right? 69 days they're trapped. 69 days. Over 2 months trapped in a mine. Okay, so what is it that helped these folks be rescued, and what was going on around them? What was the culture that was curated? Next slide, Max. The success factor, let's talk about process first. Active, visible leadership. Presence. Even the president is there. On the final night, they're pulling people out. President is online every night, encouraging people, etc. Active, visible leadership. The mining folks offer an apology within 3 or 4 days of the accident itself. There's significant transparency. I don't know if you remember this, but they had to try different angles to get down into the mine. And so every new angle or every new direction, they told people, not grade of the angle and all of that, hey, that part failed, we're not giving up, we're still going to save these miners. Transparency, cooperation, steely determination, widespread support, sought external expertise. Has anybody else seen this around? Yes, in the United States, we had X, Y, and Z. In West Virginia, we saw this. What was going on there? What were their techniques, et cetera? Thought outside the box. And lastly, the process involved simultaneous efforts. Weren't just waiting for the person at the quote-unquote top to say it was okay to do something, but deployed several parts and pieces of this where the miners were going to be cared for with varying levels of expertise. Okay, that's the process. Let's talk about the people. Deep faith, strong, united, cared for one another, remained positive. Their love was infectious. They offered encouragement, and everything was done with gratitude. That was going on in the people. That's how they saved those 33. So what does it mean for us, friends? Let's go to the next slide, Max. Oh, let's go to the next slide. Oh, Max, what did I do? Let's go to the next slide. Oh, gosh, Max, what's happening? I'm scared of you. Let's go to the next slide, Max. That's it. Oh, okay, let's go back to people. Thank you. That's weird. So let's talk about Central United Methodist Church. Is this us?
Potentially.
Well, we did after the service.
Yeah. I see this in you. I see this in you. I love seeing these things come to light and life. Do you realize how busy this church is? It is a busy church. We have 2 amazing schools on the ground floor. 2 amazing schools. We have people interacting with us every day. You all have had amazing staffs along the way. Amazing. Our experience is to break out of whatever's keeping us tethered to the past. Stephanie Kuntz wrote a book about the 1950s. Stephanie Kuntz is a history professor. I think she's now retired from Case Western. She wrote a phenomenal book called The Way We Never Were about the 1950s. And the last 3 chapters of the book talk about the idea of how the 1950s and early 60s were shrouded in this symbol of innocence, and yet the world was being transformed. A peak in divorce rates in the 1950s, school integration, transformation of our immigration policies in the United States. We were becoming more and more diverse, more integration. The United States Armed Services had been integrating for years and years and years, and got to a point where that integration led to more and more persons of color in places of power. It's a fascinating understanding of what we place on those decades of Camelot. But when you look underneath, there's something else going on. I wonder what happens when we can together confront what is our implicit bias about the church or us or our family of origin or whatever, and consciously choose a more just-filled, faithful, and compassionate way of being in the church. Instead of clutching the steering wheel so tight, worried about what's going to happen to us, instead consciously letting go and seeing that there is something greater than ourselves moving in us and around us to shape our lived experience. John Wesley, let's close on Wesley. John Wesley believed that at the end of the day, it is Scripture, tradition, and experience that really do help us with our headspace. But ultimately, it will be our lived experience that will shape our faith our whole lives long. I hope you join me in imagining and supporting one another as you see in each other deep faith, strength, unity, care, positivity, love, encouragement, and gratitude. Central United Methodist Church has had some difficulties in its season, in its long season. We're going to turn 125. Oh, is that right? Is my math right? 145. My math is wrong. 145. We 150. Ooh, somebody needs to write this down. 150 in 2029. We got to get, yes. Let's do sherbet punch. Who's in? I think sherbet punch is delicious. Okay. See, I already started the committee. But for 145 years, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, and it's okay. That lived experience brought us to right here. That strength, those are the shoulders that we stand on to reach out and reach out to love out there. I am so grateful for your lived experience and now our sharing in it. Maybe, just maybe, we can be as bold as Shirley Hallis walking into a church and say, this is my church because I believe so deeply in a love that won't quit. And I trust that when I show up as I am, in the fullness that I am, with my blue power suit and my big blue hat with feathers, that people are just going to love me the way I am. Let's build a church, friends, where Shirley Hallises everywhere can walk in and we can embrace them with the light of Christ and a love that won't quit. I have time for one question and then maybe one anger issue. Mostly from this table. Jurisdictional conference does not happen until July 10th and through the 12th. So I can do a little feed forward. We're not electing any bishops this time, so that'll be interesting. We'll mostly hear reports and determine what conferences are going to have quote unquote coverage of Episcopal leaders. Not much else is going to go on. Actually, it's a lot shorter this year. It starts at 3 o'clock on the 10th and ends at 11 o'clock on the 12th. So we only have one full day of work. We don't have to elect anybody. It'll be interesting. So, another question. Really? Was it? Yeah, Janice. Yeah, thanks. So if you didn't hear Janice's question, she said that part of my leadership style is coming in and reframing, refreshing how we see one another and how we see the church. And that's in large part just to give you my fresh eyes and my witness to what I'm sensing in you. How do then I shift from this and create, her words, several sergeants at arms that can maintain this kind of focus and attention. I think so. As I said at our church conference on March 24th, we've got a lot of grief work to do. A lot of grief work as a community of faith because we've been through some transitions, and I'll share with you what I think it is. I think in a lot of ways, Janice, this congregation has felt out of control, even when our pastors, 2 in a row, were elected as bishops, feeling out of control. It was an election in some faraway, far-flung place in South Central jurisdiction, not in Albuquerque, and the congregation didn't have a word about it, to feeling out of control about a succession of pastors. So we've got some grief work to do. Part of the grief work, dear friends, David Kessler, who studied under Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, wrote this phenomenal book called Making Meaning. And in Kessler's book, he says, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross framed 5 stages of grief for the person who's dying. It's ours, on the other side, to go do the important grief work of making meaning. What does this person's life have in store for me as a life lesson? We've got to make meaning from our grief and not just stay in it. Yes, we experienced this. We experienced all of these transitions and this sense of being uncontrolled at the at the whims of General Conference and all that kind of thing. But really, friends, it is about making meaning. So from a practical standpoint, I've got to figure out where the energy is. Our leadership board has been at it. Thank you, Claudia, so much for your hard work and diligence over the last 20 months. Yes, and everybody. Thank you, Claudia. Yes, everybody on leadership board, Claudia leads it. But we've only been at this new process for 20 months. So potentially there's still some grief being done that there's not a finance committee and trustees and SPRC, that the committee work is now unified. What does that look like? Do I feel disempowered? Do I want to get behind that? Do I want to be? So there's some important work to be done. From the practical side too, Janice, I think it's about coming in contact with one another more frequently. It's one thing to come to church together. It's a whole nother thing to see each other outside church or get connected in the community. The Pride Parade and Pride event and all of that was super fun because I got to see you all in a new light. And I hope you got to see me in a new light. And that's what I'd love to continue to do. So next week I hope to get a little more practical. Maybe I leaned into it right then. But all right, dear friends, God bless you. Don't do drugs. Have a great week. See you at church in 6 minutes. Don't be late.